At the wedding, my fiancée ripped off her veil, then said she wasn't marrying anyone. I was stunned, until I learned who she'd been with the night before. It was sickening. The morning of the wedding felt almost artificial in its brightness, as though the world had decided to stage light my life for an audience I hadn't asked for. The church smelled of fresh roses, the kind her mother insisted on importing because local flowers were too ordinary for such an occasion. The aisle shimmered under the glow of candles, polished marble reflecting the light like 1,000 silent witnesses. People had traveled from every corner to see us married. Colleagues from work, distant cousins I barely remembered, old teachers who had seen me grow up, and neighbors who knew my family only through polite greetings. The church was filled with chatter and the rustle of expensive fabrics. For weeks, I had been preparing myself for this moment, telling myself that no matter the chaos of planning, it would all be worth it once I saw her walking down the aisle. I stood there with Owen, my best man, steadying my breath, my palms slick with sweat. Owen had been my anchor for years, the one who always knew when to crack a joke or when to let silence be enough. He leaned slightly, whispering something under his breath that I couldn't catch, but the grin on his face told me he thought everything was under control. Then the music shifted. The traditional tune swelled, and all heads turned. She appeared at the far end of the aisle, white gown flowing, veil covering her face. For a second, my nerves settled. The sight of her in that moment was what I thought would erase every sleepless night, every fight over guest lists or flower arrangements. Step by step, she approached, arm locked with her father's. Something in his eyes caught my attention, though. He looked neither proud nor emotional. Instead, there was a heaviness, almost a reluctance, as if each step forward was a burden. I shook the thought away, chalking it up to nerves. After all, weddings make fathers emotional in strange ways. When she finally stood across from me, her hand slipped into mine. I felt the tremor in her fingers, subtle but unmistakable. I told myself it was normal. Brides get nervous, that's what people say. Yet the trembling didn't ease, and her shoulders seemed tense beneath the fabric of her gown. The officiant began the ceremony. Words about love, commitment, and unity drifted through the air, but my attention was fixed on her. I thought I saw her lips move behind the veil, muttering to herself, or maybe just gasping for air. Then it happened, sudden and violent against the serenity of the church. She ripped the veil from her head, fabric tearing as it slipped from her hair. Gasps erupted from the guests. Her face was pale, her eyes wild, not with tears but with a kind of panic that didn't belong to a bride. She stepped back, her gown dragging noisily across the polished floor. Her father reached out, but she pulled away. A wave of whispers flooded the room. Some thought she was fainting, others whispered about cold feet. I froze, unable to move or speak. My chest tightened as though invisible hands were pressing against me. Then, with a voice that cracked under pressure but carried enough strength to pierce the silence, she announced she couldn't marry me. She turned sharply, the train of her dress snagging against a pew, and bolted down the aisle she had just walked moments earlier. The music had stopped. The murmurs had turned into chaos. Owen stepped forward, as if to steady me, but I barely registered it. My family rushed to my side, confusion written on every face. Her mother covered her mouth with her hand, eyes darting around the room, not to me, not to her daughter, but to the guests, as if already calculating the cost of this humiliation. Her father lowered his head, and for a split second I could swear he wasn't surprised. Some guests tried to follow her, but she was gone by the time anyone reached the doors. I stood at the altar, surrounded by flowers, rings, and expectations that had just shattered in front of everyone I knew. My humiliation wasn't private. It was staged for an audience of hundreds. I don't remember how long I stood there, but the next thing I knew, Owen was pulling me aside, telling me to sit down, though his words felt like muffled noise in my ears. People gathered in clusters, whispering. My aunt asked if she was sick. My cousin muttered about her being unstable. Her bridesmaids huddled together, eyes darting nervously, whispering furiously, as though trying to coordinate a story. I noticed Maya, one of her closest friends, fidgeting more than the others. She avoided looking at me directly, her hands trembling as she clutched her bouquet too tightly. She leaned into another bridesmaid's ear, whispering, and the two of them exchanged a look I couldn't interpret but knew was wrong. Her father eventually approached me, resting a heavy hand on my shoulder. He didn't apologize. He didn't even explain. He just muttered that she would talk to me soon, as if that was supposed to fix what had just happened. His eyes, though, betrayed something else. It wasn't shock. It wasn't devastation. It was resignation, like he had been bracing for this moment. When I asked where she had gone, he shook his head. No answer, no attempt to find her. He simply walked back to his wife, who was busy instructing people to keep their voices down and not make a bigger scene. The longer I stood there, the clearer it became that no one was going to hand me the truth. Not her parents, not her friends, not even the officiant, who awkwardly excused himself and slipped out the side door. Everyone seemed more concerned with controlling appearances than with addressing the fact that the bride had just run from her own wedding. Eventually, the crowd began to thin. Some guests left quietly, others stayed behind, waiting for some explanation that never came. I sat in the side room with Owen, who finally admitted he thought she had been acting strange for weeks. He had brushed it off as wedding stress, the same way I had. But now, his words hinted at something darker he had been afraid to say before. My mind replayed every strange detail from the past month. The late-night texts she wouldn't explain, the sudden mood swings, the nights she claimed she was with her stepbrother helping him get his life together after a breakup. At the time, I thought it was harmless, just her being supportive of family. Now, the weight of those memories pressed down on me. The humiliation burned, but underneath it was a gnawing sense that this wasn't impulsive panic. This was deliberate. She had chosen that moment, with everyone watching, to shatter everything. And the way her father's eyes had looked, the way Maya fidgeted, it told me I wasn't the only one who knew something was wrong. When the church finally emptied, I remained behind, staring at the altar as though the flowers and ribbons would rearrange themselves into an answer. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint rustle of petals falling from bouquets left abandoned on the pews. I realized then that my wedding day wasn't just ruined. It had been hijacked. Something had driven her to run, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone else already knew what it was, everyone except me. And that was the moment humiliation gave way to suspicion. The hours after the ceremony collapse bled into a haze of confusion. Guests had scattered, the reception hall stood unused, and the food carefully prepared by caterers began to wilt under the weight of neglect. My phone buzzed relentlessly with calls from family members asking if they should cancel hotel rooms, if the honeymoon was still happening, if I was all right. I silenced every call. I wasn't ready to give anyone answers. That night, lying awake in a bed that should have been ours, I replayed every moment leading up to the disaster. The trembling of her hands, her father's hollow eyes, Maya's guilt-ridden glances, all of it screamed that something more sinister was happening behind the curtain of what was supposed to be a perfect day. My humiliation was only the surface. The real question gnawed at me. What had she done the night before? By morning, I was done sitting in silence. I started with Owen. He had been with me through every stage of this relationship, and if anyone noticed something I hadn't, it would be him. Over breakfast that neither of us touched, he admitted he had seen her stepbrother Caleb lurking around town in the days before the wedding. Supposedly Caleb wasn't even supposed to attend. Work commitments. That was the excuse. Yet Owen swore he had spotted him near a downtown hotel late at night. That was the first crack in the wall of silence. Caleb's absence at the wedding had felt odd. The excuse about work had sounded too convenient. But in the chaos of planning, I hadn't questioned it. Now it burned in my mind. If he had been in town, why hadn't he shown up? Determined, I reached out to the bridesmaids. Most of them dodged my calls, clearly following some unspoken agreement to keep quiet. Only Maya responded, though her voice was clipped and cautious. She claimed they had all been together at the hotel suite reserved for the bridal party, drinking wine and doing last-minute preparations. The story sounded rehearsed, too clean to be real. And when I pressed her for details, what they ate, who left early, her answers stumbled. It didn't take much to realize she was hiding something. The next step came from chance. While walking downtown later that day, I overheard two waitstaff from a restaurant gossiping about a bride in full panic who had stormed out of dinner reservations the night before her wedding. They didn't mention names, but the description of her gown, her hair, even the specific earrings she wore, left no doubt it was her. And the part that twisted my stomach? She hadn't been alone. A man had been with her. I asked carefully, pretending to be curious rather than desperate. They described him as tall, broad-shouldered, with a rough beard. The description could match plenty of men, but paired with Owen's sighting of Caleb, the puzzle pieces started aligning. My suspicions solidified when I visited the hotel where the bridal suite had been booked. The clerk at the front desk recognized her immediately. With a glance around to ensure his manager wasn't watching, he whispered that she had checked into a separate room under a different reservation, not the suite reserved for the bridesmaids. He remembered because she had come in laughing with a man, clearly tipsy, and had handed over cash instead of using her credit card. That single detail, that she had avoided leaving a digital trail, made it clear this wasn't cold feet or nerves. This had been planned. Owen insisted we go back to the hotel together, that maybe someone else had noticed more. A housekeeper remembered cleaning a room that morning, sheets tangled, minibar empty, and champagne glasses smeared with lipstick. She had seen the man leaving early, tugging his jacket on in a hurry. When I asked her to describe him, her voice caught. The details matched Caleb perfectly. I felt the air drain from my lungs. Even then, I tried to rationalize. Maybe they had just met for comfort. Maybe there had been no intimacy. But deep down I knew. The secrecy, the lies, the deliberate avoidance of leaving evidence. It pointed to something much darker than a late-night talk between siblings. Still, suspicion wasn't enough. I needed proof. I called Maya again, this time more forcefully. She cracked. Her voice trembled as she admitted she hadn't been able to sleep for days, watching her friend spiral into something she couldn't control. She confessed that my fiancé had slipped out of the suite after dinner with the other bridesmaids, claiming she needed air. Hours passed before she returned, makeup smudged, dress wrinkled, hair messy in a way that only intimacy could explain. Maya hadn't confronted her directly, but had pieced together enough to know she hadn't been alone. When I pressed for who, Maya's silence screamed louder than words. Finally, she whispered it was someone I wouldn't want to believe. That was enough. By now, the picture was almost complete, but I refused to stop at rumors and whispers. I needed undeniable evidence. With Owen's help, I tracked down the bar receipt Caleb had signed at a nearby lounge. It was dated the night before the wedding, timestamped late. His name was there in clear print, the signature his, the charges for champagne and expensive liquor matching the timeline. The truth clawed at me, but still I pursued more. My fiancé's father had to know something. His eyes at the altar hadn't been those of a man blindsided. I visited him, demanding answers. He looked older, wearier than I'd ever seen him. For a long time, he said nothing, just stared into the glass of whiskey in his hand. Finally, he muttered that families carry secrets, and sometimes protecting appearances mattered more than protecting truth. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. He just warned me to stop digging before I uncovered something I couldn't live with. That warning only sharpened my resolve. The next day, I returned to the hotel with Owen. After a small bribe, the clerk produced security footage. Grainy but unmistakable, it showed her stepping into the elevator with Caleb, her hand brushing his arm, her laugh tilting her head back in a way I recognized all too well. Hours later, the footage showed them leaving together, her leaning against him, his arm around her waist. Watching that screen, I felt my insides turn to ice. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a mistake with an old flame. It was her stepbrother. The man who had grown up in the same house, shared family dinners, attended holidays at the same table. The betrayal wasn't just against me. It was against everything their family claimed to stand for. I stumbled out of the hotel, Owen at my side, his face pale as he realized the depth of what we had uncovered. The puzzle wasn't just complete, it was grotesque. Back in my apartment, I spread the evidence across the table. Receipts, Maya's reluctant testimony, the clerk's words, the hotel footage. Each piece screamed the same thing. The woman I was supposed to marry had spent the night before our wedding with her stepbrother, in secret, while her family either looked away or actively worked to cover it up. The humiliation I had felt at the altar now transformed into something sharper, darker. This wasn't about embarrassment anymore. It was about deceit at a level I had never imagined. And I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This story wasn't finished. I thought I had seen enough. The grainy hotel footage burned itself into my mind. The sight of her leaning into Caleb, laughing with the kind of comfort that came only from long familiarity, crushed whatever fragile hope I had left. Yet, even with undeniable proof, I couldn't stop digging. It wasn't enough to know. I needed to understand how deep the rot went. The first clue came from Maya. After I confronted her again, she broke more easily this time. She admitted she had caught glimpses of late-night messages on the bride's phone weeks before the wedding. At first, she thought it was harmless banter with an old friend, until she noticed Caleb's name flashing across the screen. When she tried to ask about it, she was brushed off with laughter and told not to worry. But Maya had known. She had known and said nothing. Her guilt was clear, but she wasn't the only one complicit. The family had played a larger role than I first realized. Her mother, desperate to save appearances, had quietly approached Caleb days before the ceremony. She had offered him money to leave town, to stay away at least until after the vows were exchanged. But Caleb, stubborn and arrogant, had refused. According to Maya, he bragged about how no amount of money would keep him from what was already his. That phrase stuck with me. What was already his? The arrogance, the entitlement, the twisted logic of a man who believed his position in her life excused what they were doing. I confronted her father again, pushing harder this time. He sat slumped in his leather chair, whiskey glass trembling slightly in his hand. I demanded to know when he first suspected. His silence was my answer. After a long pause, he muttered that families sometimes carry burdens outsiders cannot understand. His words were evasive, but the expression on his face told me he had known for months. Perhaps longer. He had chosen to ignore it, hoping it would burn itself out or stay hidden. The disgust that welled inside me was sharper than the pain of betrayal. Her father, The man who had shaken my hand with practiced warmth had allowed me to walk into marriage with a woman tangled in something vile. And her mother, frantic but powerless, had tried to clean up the mess with bribes rather than truth. The worst part was realizing that I had been groomed for silence too. Whenever I raised concerns about her closeness with Caleb in the past, I had been reassured. She was helping him through heartbreak, she said. He had always leaned on her. Their bond was strong, nothing more. I had let myself believe it because doubt felt petty, and trust was supposed to be the cornerstone of love. Now I saw how thoroughly I had been manipulated. Determined to know how long this had been going on, I traced her financial records. Using joint accounts we had once shared, I found transfers of cash to Caleb stretching back months. Small amounts at first, then larger sums, always disguised as helping him pay off debts or cover rent. But when I visited his apartment, the landlord told me Caleb had been paying in cash for nearly a year. The money wasn't for survival. It was cover, a way to keep their nights in hotels hidden, their dinners and gifts untraceable. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was methodical. Still, whispers weren't enough. I needed something that would break through the web of silence her family had built. That came from an unlikely source, a hotel bartender who remembered serving them. He recalled her laughing too loudly, Caleb's arm wrapped possessively around her, and her saying she didn't care if anyone found out tomorrow, because tonight was theirs. Those words, so casual, so reckless, sealed the image in my mind. On the eve of our wedding, while guests were traveling and families preparing to witness our union, she had chosen to belong to him. It wasn't only sickening, it was humiliating on a level I had no words for. By now, Owen was urging me to stop. He said I had enough proof, enough reasons to move on, that continuing to dig would only deepen wounds. But I couldn't let it go. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about the people who had stood around me, smiling, while knowing exactly what was happening. It was about the father who shook my hand at rehearsal dinners, the mother who toasted to our future, the bridesmaids who promised loyalty. All of them had either known or suspected, and all of them had chosen silence. I pushed further. Eventually, one of the younger cousins slipped. Over drinks, he admitted that rumors had been swirling in the family for months. That holidays had been tense, with glances exchanged and arguments whispered behind closed doors. He even told me about a fight he overheard between her mother and Caleb, where she accused him of ruining everything. The cousin hadn't understood at the time, but hearing it now, the meaning was clear. The betrayal wasn't only personal, it was systemic. The final blow came when Owen, desperate to shield me from further harm, admitted something of his own. Weeks before the wedding, he had noticed Caleb showing up at places she was supposed to be with friends. Once, he even spotted them together at a cafe outside of town, leaning close over a table, laughing like teenagers in love. He hadn't told me because he didn't want to destroy me if it turned out to be nothing. His silence, though well-meaning, had left me walking blind into the fire. That confession almost broke me more than the evidence itself. To know that even my closest friend had chosen silence, it made me question if anyone in my life had truly been on my side. By the end of that week, I had a complete picture. She hadn't stumbled into betrayal at the last second. She had been weaving it for months, maybe years. Her family had known and chosen silence. Her friends had seen enough to suspect, but had protected her instead of me. And my best friend had swallowed his doubts to spare me, only to leave me unprepared for the impact. Every step I took, every discovery I made, added weight to a truth I couldn't ignore. The wedding hadn't collapsed because of nerves or panic. It had collapsed because it was never meant to stand. She had been living a double life, tied to a man who should have been untouchable, and dragging me along as her cover until the facade cracked under its own rot. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the physical evidence of her betrayal, receipts, testimonies, recordings. The papers blurred as exhaustion set in, but the conclusion was crystal clear. This wasn't just about love lost. It was about being deceived on a scale so grotesque it warped the boundaries of family, trust, and loyalty. And with that clarity came a new determination. Humiliation was no longer enough. Silence wasn't acceptable. The truth had to come out, not just for me, but for every person who had been lied to, manipulated, and made complicit by omission. The question wasn't whether I would act. It was how. The weight of proof sat heavy on my table, but the heavier weight was inside me. For days, I had wrestled with the question of what to do with it. Keep it quiet and try to salvage my dignity in private, or reveal it, and let the fallout spread like fire through every corner of her carefully manicured life. Silence tempted me for a moment, but the memory of standing at the altar, humiliated in front of everyone I knew, erased that option. She had chosen public ruin for me. I would give her the same in return. I started with the people closest. I invited Owen over, laying everything out in front of him. Receipts, testimonies, footage. His face hardened as he took it in. He had known pieces, but seeing the entire picture left him silent for a long stretch. Finally, he said what I already knew. The truth had to be shown, and not in whispers. In the same way she had ripped the veil from her head and detonated my life in front of an audience, I would detonate hers. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Her parents, desperate to control the story, arranged a private gathering with extended family and some of the wedding guests. They wanted to spin it, to soften the humiliation, to paint her collapse as a tragic case of nerves. Invitations went out quietly, but word reached me. They hadn't expected me to show up. I did. When I walked into their house, the air was thick with tension. Glasses clinked, conversations died mid-sentence, and every eye turned toward me. Her mother's smile was tight, her father's jaw set. She wasn't there yet. I didn't waste time. I pulled the hotel footage up on the screen of my laptop and set it on the table where everyone could see. Gasps filled the room. Some turned away immediately, unable to watch. Others leaned forward, horrified. Her uncle muttered something under his breath. Her aunt covered her mouth, and whispers rippled like waves. Then she walked in, perfectly timed to see her own betrayal frozen on the screen. Her face drained of color, the confidence she had worn like armor all her life collapsing in an instant. For the first time since the altar, she looked genuinely afraid. I didn't need to shout. I simply explained what the footage showed, what the receipts proved, what Maya had admitted. The truth was a tide too strong to stop. Every piece fit neatly into place, undeniable and grotesque. Her mother broke down first, sobbing into her hands, realizing the social ruin now attached to her daughter's name. Her father stayed stone-faced, but his silence was louder than any denial. He had known. And now, everyone else knew too. The guests left in a rush, muttering, shaking their heads. Within hours, the story spread. Families talk, and this family had given them enough to gossip about for years. By the next morning, her name was whispered in every cafe and workplace. The bride who ran from her own wedding because she had been in bed with her stepbrother the night before. No one could protect her from that. But the consequences didn't stop with her reputation. Caleb's employer, a mid-level government office where image mattered as much as competence, called him in for questioning. When the scandal became public, his position became untenable. He was quietly removed, escorted from the building under the pretense of personal reasons. Word spread quickly that the reasons were anything but personal. He went from respected to disgraced overnight. Her family suffered next. Her parents, once the picture of status and control, found themselves ostracized. Invitations to galas and dinners stopped arriving. Business partners pulled away, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Even their closest friends turned cold, unwilling to defend what couldn't be defended. The family's name, carefully curated for decades, was now synonymous with shame. As for her, the fallout was brutal. She tried to spin the story, claiming it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, but the evidence was too strong. People didn't believe her. Friends cut ties. Employers avoided her. Even the bridesmaids who had once shielded her distanced themselves, afraid of being dragged down with her. One final twist came when I discovered she had confided in her younger cousin weeks before the wedding, admitting she wasn't sure she could go through with marrying me. She had hinted that Caleb had been the one she truly wanted all along. That revelation spread just as fast as the footage, turning her image from tragic to monstrous in the eyes of everyone who had once admired her. Through all of this, I kept silent in public, letting the evidence speak. I didn't need to defend myself, didn't need to shout about betrayal. The facts were enough. People drew their own conclusions, and those conclusions left me free of blame while she bore every ounce of the disgrace. Owen remained at my side, though even our friendship bore scars. His silence before the wedding still lingered between us, unspoken but heavy. Yet he proved loyal in the aftermath, helping me sift through the storm, reminding me that survival mattered more than vengeance once the truth had already destroyed her. Still, vengeance had its place. Weeks later, I heard that Caleb had left town, unable to endure the constant stares and whispers. She stayed behind, but not as the woman I had once thought she was. She had become an outcast in her own circles, every whisper a reminder of the night she chose to throw her life away for something unspeakable. As for me, the path forward was strange, almost hollow at first. The future I had built in my mind, marriage, home, family, was gone. But in its place came something sharper, freedom. I no longer lived under the weight of her lies or the manipulation of her family. I walked away not with closure, but with clarity. The final consequence came when her father sought me out, weeks after the scandal had reached its peak. He looked broken, thinner, his confidence stripped. He admitted he had known, that he had hoped it would end quietly, that he had prayed she would come to her senses. He said he hadn't stopped her because he didn't know how, because facing the truth was harder than lying. I listened, but I felt no sympathy. His cowardice had cost me my dignity, my trust, and almost my future. I left him standing there, his apology hanging useless in the air. In the end, the consequences were complete. She had ruined herself, her stepbrother had lost everything, and her family had been dragged down in the wreckage. What remained was the knowledge that sometimes the worst betrayals are not only personal. They are systemic, carried by entire families, shielded by silence until the truth burst through. The night of the wedding replayed often in my mind, but the image that stayed strongest wasn't her ripping the veil or fleeing down the aisle. It was the moment in that crowded living room, when the footage played and every person who had once shielded her was forced to face the truth. That moment had turned humiliation into vindication. And though scars remained, I knew one thing for certain. I hadn't lost that day. She had. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.